Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tearing apart a single, unbelievable legal source. It really puts the cold, hard logic of contract law right up against, well, the rawest human emotion.
That's right.
We are looking at the case of Kim v. Sun. It's a situation involving huge financial loss, staggering intoxication, and a personal promise signed quite literally in human blood.
It's an incredible set of facts.
Totally. And you think, okay, when you write down a promise this dramatic, this visceral, surely the courts have to enforce it, right? I mean,
Well,
come on.
well, that's exactly the core tension we're here to explore today. The mission for you, the learner, is really to understand the legal firewall, you could say, that protects people from their own emotional promises. We are talking about the single, non-negotiable component that turns what feels like a moral obligation into an actual legal contract, consideration.
Right. And this isn't just about, reciting rules from a textbook. We need to define exactly what consideration is, use the incredible facts of Kim v. Sun to test that rule, maybe even to its breaking point, and then really analyze the policy behind it. The central question is this: does the law care more about how sincere a promise feels or how the deal is structured? Is blood, in the eyes of the court, actually weightier than a peppercorn?
That famous phrase. To start, let's just quickly go back to basics. Contract formation, it needs offer, acceptance, and this crucial concept we're digging into today, consideration.
Okay, let's unpack this core idea then. If someone just stands up and makes a promise like, I promise I'll give you $100,000 next month, what exactly is the legal price that has to be paid to make that promise stick? To make it enforceable, not just, a generous but legally empty offer.
Right. The essential element is consideration. The black letter law, the absolute rule, requires a bargain for exchange. This is critical. Consideration is defined as some benefit to the person making the promise, or some detriment, some loss or action taken by the person receiving the promise. And crucially, it has to be given specifically as the price for that promise. It's really not about how much value is exchanged, it's about the structure of the deal. The promise has to induce the detriment, and the detriment, in turn, has to induce the promise.
So it has to be like a two-way street, really reciprocal. It's not enough that I just happen to be doing something nice over here while you happen to be promising me something big over there.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. If a promise is made purely out of sympathy or love or guilt, or just as a gift, the law calls that a gratuitous promise. And because there was no reciprocal exchange, no inducement back and forth, a gratuitous promise is legally unenforceable. Doesn't matter how dramatic it seems or how much money is involved.
Okay, now we take that strict kind of academic rule and we throw it into the chaos of the real world with this spectacular case, Kim v. Sun from 2009. We've got financial ruin, emotional overload. We really need to see if this element of consideration can stand up to the pressure of a promise written in, well, blood.
Yeah, it's the ultimate stress test for the doctrine.
Let's analyze Kim v. Sun. First, what are the legally dispositive facts? What are the key details here?
Okay. The defendant is Stephen Sun. He was involved in two companies, MJ Inc. and Natouch International Inc. The plaintiff, Jinsu Kim, was an investor and also a creditor who loaned money to those businesses. Kim invested 100 million won and loaned 30 million won to MJ and then loaned another $40,000 to Natouch. Now, importantly, our sources make it really clear. Kim wired all this money directly into the corporate bank accounts.
Okay. Not to Sun himself.
Exactly. Sun never personally guaranteed any of this debt. The businesses sadly failed, and Kim lost everything he put in.
A really tough situation already. But then, as you said, the drama just ramps up.
It really does. Well over a year after the investments had failed, Sun and Kim met up at a sushi bar. And the record states Sun was extremely intoxicated, very drunk. And in this moment, described as profoundly emotional, Sun apparently used a safety pin to prick his finger and wrote a note in his own blood. It read something like, "Sir, please forgive me. Because of my deeds you have suffered financially. I will repay you to the best of my ability." He also wrote a separate note, this one in ink, promising 170 million won. Kim later sued Sun personally to enforce these promises.
Okay. And what was the core legal issue the court had to figure out?
The legal question, was whether Sun's deeply personal and frankly dramatic promise written in both blood and ink to repay the money Kim lost was supported by sufficient legal consideration to make it an enforceable contract. Or alternatively, was it just a gratuitous promise, something stemming from intense personal guilt, maybe sympathy, maybe the alcohol, but not a bargain.
Right. What rule did the court apply to decide this?
The court went straight back to basics. It applied the fundamental rule that a contract absolutely requires a bargain for exchange. It even explicitly referenced that famous old rule, the one that says the law doesn't really care about the adequacy of consideration, meaning even something tiny like a symbolic peppercorn can be enough. But
There's always a but.
always. But that peppercorn, however small, must be the actual thing being bargained for. If there's no bargain at all, there's simply no contract. Doesn't matter how much drama or blood is involved.
Okay. So what was the court's analysis? How did they apply that rule to these very intense facts?
Right. The court basically broke down their argument for consideration into two parts. First, it looked at the original money Kim put in. The court established, look, those loans and investments went to the corporations, not to Sun personally.
Okay.
So Sun had no existing legal duty to prepay that money. He hadn't signed a personal guarantee.
Makes sense.
Second, the court looked at the actual meeting in the sushi bar. The analysis concluded that this blood agreement, as dramatic as it was not a bargain. Not at all. Sun made the promise, the court found, because he was, quote, feeling sorry for Kim's losses. His promise was driven by guilt, maybe sympathy, certainly intoxication, but it was not induced by any new action or promise or forbearance from Kim at that moment.
So Kim just being there, having lost the money, wasn't enough.
Exactly. Kim wasn't doing anything new in exchange for Sun's promise. He was just existing, having already lost his money maybe a year or more before.
So the fact that Kim had suffered this huge financial loss in the past wasn't enough to make Sun's new promise enforceable. That seems harsh.
It might feel harsh, but legally, absolutely not. The court specifically labeled Kim's previous loans and his suffering as past consideration. And the rule here is crystal clear. Past consideration, something you already did before the new promise is even made, cannot support a new contract. The timing is absolutely fatal here because Sun's promise wasn't made in order to get Kim to make those past investments.
Right, the inducement wasn't there, and the conclusion. What did the court finally decide?
The trial court had ruled for Sun, saying the promise wasn't enforceable. The appellate court agreed and affirmed that ruling. The promise was unenforceable because it completely lacked that required element of a bargain for exchange. And the court really drove the point home with that memorable line, stating plainly that Sun's blood, despite all its drama, was not weightier than a peppercorn in the context of contract law. No bargain, no contract.
Okay, this is where we really need to slow down for a second, because I think that conclusion feels deeply counterintuitive to, the average person on the street.
It often does.
You see this promise made with incredible seriousness, literally signed in blood, based on what feels like a clear moral obligation to fix a real harm. Why is the law so stubbornly strict about this bargain requirement? Why can't moral duty, especially one acknowledged so dramatically, be enough?
Yeah, and that raises a really important question. It goes right to the policy foundations, the why behind contract law. We have to understand that contract law exists primarily to facilitate and regulate economic exchange, commerce, business. It's not really designed to police generosity or enforce purely moral feelings. Think about it. If courts started enforcing promises driven only by sympathy or guilt or moral obligation, well, the whole judicial system might just collapse under the weight of trying to enforce every regretful gift, every social commitment, every drunken promise.
So it's partly about just managing the court's workload, judicial efficiency.
That's part of it, definitely. But it's also about protecting individual autonomy and providing clarity in our dealings. If we allowed moral obligation to count as consideration, it would create this massive, slippery slope. How would a court objectively measure the difference between genuine moral guilt that should be enforced versus just a casual social promise made out of politeness? It's almost impossible.
Right. Where do you draw the line?
Exactly. The clear rule, the requirement of a bargain, gives us a relatively bright line. It says, if you want the law's protection for your promise, you need to structure it as an exchange. It also protects people, maybe counterintuitively, from finding out later that their charitable impulse or, their drunken outburst at a sushi bar has suddenly exposed them to years of expensive litigation. The law kind of chooses formality over feeling to ensure some reliability, especially in commerce.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense from a systems perspective.
Yeah,
Let's go back
totally.
to that timing issue, because you said it was fatal. That difference between past consideration and a real bargain.
Yes, absolute critical.
Let's play out that hypothetical we mentioned earlier, just to really nail down the distinction. If Sun had written that note before Kim handed over the $40,000 to NetTouch,
Okay.
saying something like, look, if you loan this $40,000 to NetTouch right now, I, Stephen Sun, personally promise I'll pay you back if the business goes under. Would the court have reached the opposite conclusion then?
Well, now what's fascinating here is that the answer almost certainly changes entirely based on that shift in timing. If Sun's personal promise came first, and that promise is what induced Kim, what caused Kim, to then go ahead and loan the $40,000, well, that act of loaning the money after the promise would constitute a new legal detriment incurred by Kim specifically in exchange for Sun's promise.
Okay, that's easy.
The two events, Sun's promise and Kim's subsequent loan, would be linked. They'd form that reciprocal exchange the law demands.
So the key isn't just the $40,000 itself. It's the fact that the money was handed over because of Sun's promise. The promise came first and caused the action.
Exactly right. Inducement. That's the heart of the bargain. Think of it like a rescue attempt. In the actual Kim case, Kim had already sunk the money. The investment boat had already gone down months or years before. Sun comes along later and throws him a life vest, the blood note out of guilt. That's legally just a gift after the fact. But in your hypothetical, Sun says beforehand, I promise I will personally pay you back if you swim out to that failing boat right now and secure the anchor for the company. Kim then swims out, loans the money. Kim's action, his detriment, was done in exchange for Sun's promise. That new detriment creates the necessary consideration.
Wow. Okay. That distinction, that past action cannot support a future contract, is precisely why that incredibly dramatic blood note, despite its emotional weight, meant absolutely nothing legally.
Correct.
The only thing Kim really gave in return for the blood note was the fact that he'd already lost his money, and the law demands a fresh bargain, something new exchanged at the time of the promise.
Precisely. Now, if Kim had, say, promised not to sue Sun for fraud related to the business failure in exchange for Sun making that repayment promise in the sushi bar, well, that forbearance, giving up a legal right at that moment, that likely would have constituted new consideration. Blood or ink wouldn't matter. The act of exchange would be there.
Okay. This case, Kim v. Sun, it really offers a clear, unforgettable example for spotting consideration issues in contract law. It feels like you now have a perfect diagnostic checklist, basically derived right from the court's own thinking.
Absolutely. Let's synthesize this into an actionable tool, a framework for you, the learner. When you're analyzing a potential contract problem, especially concerning consideration, try following these steps. First, step 1, identify the promise. Was a clear promise actually made? A commitment to repay a specific amount or perform a specific act. If the promise itself is too vague, like Sun's to the best of my ability, you might already have enforcement problems even before considering consideration.
Okay, find the promise.
Second, step 2, scrutinize the exchange. This is key. What did the person receiving the promisee like Kim give or promise to give, at the moment the main promise was made in direct return for the promiser's, Sun's, commitment? It has to be a specific detriment or benefit exchange then and there. If the answer seems to be nothing new, proceed very cautiously.
Look for the what's in it for them.
Exactly. Third, step 3, test for gratuitous intent. Was the promise based solely on a feeling of regret, maybe a moral obligation, maybe just making up for past loss? Remember, the law generally requires a commercial-style bargain, not just a moral recompense or a gift. If the motivation looks purely emotional or backward-looking, the promise is likely unenforceable due to lack of consideration.
Check the motive.
And finally, step 4, check timing. This was crucial in Kim. If the supposed benefit or detriment, the action that's meant to support the contract, happened before the promise was made, it's almost certainly past consideration. And past consideration cannot serve as the bargain for exchange for a new promise. Timing in the courtroom can be everything.
Got it. Identify the promise, scrutinize the exchange, test the intent, check the timing. So what does this all really mean for you, the listener, whether you're prepping for a contracts exam or just trying to manage your own agreements in life? It means that in the eyes of the law, the substance of the exchange, the structure of the bargain, is vastly more important than how dramatic the presentation is or how heavy the emotional weight feels. Moral debt, regret, even promises in blood often can't overcome the law's requirement for a cold, hard bargain.
Right, and this really raises an important closing question for you to think about. If the law demands this clear, reciprocal bargain to enforce a commitment and steps away from enforcing purely moral or emotional promises, what structures or systems do you rely on outside the courtroom to ensure that the weight of a deeply felt moral promise is actually honored when the law itself says hands off?
That is a profound thought to end on. Thank you for sharing your sources and walking us through this crucial deep dive into the law of consideration. We'll catch you next time.